Paul, pleasure to meet you this afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Nice to meet you, Chris, in this very strange times we're living in.
Very strange. And actually, what I want to talk to you this afternoon about is Stadia, which I know you've become a real expert in. And actually, you are probably bring a completely different dimension to most consultants who are experts on this, because you've been a chief executive of a club, been a player, and involved in helping lots of Stadia review how they actually build them as well, which actually is quite unique, I think it's fair to say, in this market.
Yeah. Somebody once called me a stadiologist, and I asked them, what did that mean? And they said, well, it's somebody who does more than one stadium. And when I looked into this, a lot of people who build stadiums, they do it for their own club, and they stay with their own club. It's normally directors who do it, and they don't take that knowledge to other clubs. I've had the good fortune to have done 3 stadiums in the UK, plus Wembley Stadium, and doing stadiums abroad. So obviously you learn from this. Each one hopefully gets a little better than the last.
And I think the first question we're going to ask is, look, this is an incredibly difficult time for stadiums this year. How do you think we're going to come out the other side of this?
Well, my own view is stadiums have to change considerably. I did some work with MasterCard last year, and they're focusing MasterCard on a stadium being the focal point of new towns and cities.
Yeah,
they're saying place a stadium in almost the edge of a town, greenfield site, and then watch a town or a city develop around it, providing it has the right facilities. And this new stadium, believe it or not, it has no car parking around it. The car parking is 300, 400, 500 yards away. It has the pitch up on level 3, which allows you to have shops and offices on the ground level. And it has lots of facilities, like it has a town hall at one end, it has a university at the other end, and it's a multi-purpose building rather than a single-purpose building that I watched Burnley be beaten at Tottenham with their new £1 billion stadium. And great that it is. What can you use it for apart from a game of football? And okay, maybe there's American football and the odd rock concert, but you don't have people there almost 7 days a week. Once you wrap shops around the ground floor and you wrap offices around the first floor and you have the pitch up on level 3, then it becomes a building that stays very, very busy through the week and can become the focal point of a new town or a new city.
I suppose that's what Stamford Bridge, when it got converted, was trying to do in its own way, wasn't it?
Indeed so, yeah. That was the starting point, but we didn't know in those days, what we were trying to achieve. We were all just trying to get, in the olden days, if I can call it that, in the early days of New Stadium, the idea was to pack in as many people that you can get, and because that will bring in gate receipts. The talk is now that if no spectators ever went to watch a football match, it wouldn't make much difference to the finances. Gate receipts aren't one of the major income streams now. Obviously, you've got television money, and these games are broadcast around the world. So the only reason, if I can say this tongue-in-cheek probably, the only reason for having spectators in there is not for the money they generate, it's for the atmosphere they create. And it makes it a better spectacle for beaming this game all around the world.
Yeah, I have to say, I've struggled during this period not seeing the fans in the stadiums. And I do wonder whether some of the players are up for it sometimes.
Well, they're not. And I remember myself, when I was a player, we used to have pre-season friendlies. Yeah, and you'd often have it with an empty stadium. And it was awful to play in the quietness of it all. And you can see that many of the players they're not really up for it. Many of these players are performers, and they want to perform in front of an audience. And it's not quite the same when you're just rehearsing, and that's what it seems to be.
I mean, one of the concerns during this period of time is all the smaller clubs in the stadiums as well, isn't it? And how they're going to survive. So I can understand that actually trying to reinvent how you become centre of the community is going to be important for them, isn't it?
It is. It's very difficult because generally, if there's any spare money around in a football club, it's the manager wants it to strengthen his team, and everybody's trying to generate income to give to the manager so we can go out and buy star players. So generally, there isn't a big bank balance sat there waiting to be spent. And when income streams stop to being generated like they are now, because it's not only match day income, it's income, as we know, the catering income through the week, the events income through the week, all these different income streams, they're just not there anymore. So it's I just wonder. I'm just glad I'm not involved in it anymore because it's quite a bad time. When I was a player, you probably won't remember this, and many of your listeners won't. We had the miners' strikes, and players were abandoned. You could only play on Sunday afternoons because you couldn't switch the floodlights on. It was the time of the political problems. We thought we had it bad then, and then we had in the early, I think it was the late 80s, we had the foot and mouth problems, and that caused a few problems in football stadiums. But this latest pandemic is just frightening. So I'm glad I'm not involved in it.
But is there? I mean, I suppose one of the questions is how actually. I mean, you've answered it a bit. How stadiums going to reinvent themselves? They've got to connect back to communities, haven't they? In some ways.
Well, they will do. For me, what has to change is the design of the stadium. Basically, the single-purpose buildings, they're built just for football and not for much else. And this is where it starts to fall apart. We know we can have the odd sportsman's dinners and the odd wedding and the odd conference. But I remember the chairman at Bolton Wanderers when we'd built that big new stadium in the wrong part of town, 7 or 8 miles away, but we won't done it from the birthplace, so we won't go into that. But I remember the chairman saying to me, he said, I've done a calculation, and if we don't have any events at this stadium on non-match days, he said, we don't lose any money because the cost of opening this massive building and the cost of operating the car parks and the reception and the heating and the lighting, it just eats away at the profits we make. We're better. So he was saying it's a single purpose building, a football stadium. All it's there for is to have a game of football.
And that's what we think is going to change. That's what you see as changing.
Well, it has to change if we want to, if we do put the pitch up on level 3, a football pitch. This is a good mark. A football pitch is 2 acres. If you lift the pitch up onto level 3, you've got 2 levels beneath it, and once you add to the pitch the undercroft of the stands, you end up with 12 acres. Now, that is an awful lot of space. And this is how you have your car parking under the pitch. You've 2 levels of car parking. You've shops wrapped all the way around ground level. You've offices wrapped all the way around first level. And it turns it into a building that is quite easy to turn into a football stadium on match days. But through the week, instead of it being a ghost town, it's a very, very busy place.
Yeah, look, I understand logic. How did you get into this? You started as a player. Yeah. And we're talking earlier that you were in the famous team that beat the great Leeds United team 4-1 at Ellen Road, which I still remember.
Yeah, I tapped one in, and I had an overhead kick. Which
the overhead kick, I remember.
I've never done an overhead kick in my life, Chris, honestly. And suddenly the ball just bounced up there, and I threw myself up, and luckily it just flew into the back of the net. And the Burnley fans called it the goal of the decade. So I've been trading off this for the last at least 40 years. So yeah, it was happy times. So I was a player, yes. Never played for England, got called up for England, but never quite made it. I played England under 23. So I was a bread and butter player, had a good long career. At the end of my time, I was a little bit, I think it was a good idea that I had. I didn't want to try and live off being an ex-professional player, an ex-star, a has-been. And so I decided I'd try and start right at the very bottom if that was possible. And I was offered a job as commercial manager at a non-league football team where they used to get 400 spectators called Dynamos. and I was in. Oops, sorry about that. There's
All right.
a phone call coming in. I can't stop that. I don't think that. I'll start that again. I'll switch my phone off. I started off at a team called Dynamos, which was a non-league team, and I became commercial manager. We used to get a few hundred spectators each week, and my job was everything. I used to pay the referee, I used to manage the car park, I used to sell the perimeter advertising, I used to sell the shirt sponsorship, I got sponsored cars for the players, I did just about everything. But what a fantastic experience it was, because it was almost identical to what I did at Wembley a few years later, except there was more noughts on the end at Wembley. So, you know, I encourage young people now, don't think if you want to work in the football business, you have to walk into Ellen Road at Leeds or at Tottenham or at Chelsea or at Burnley or wherever. Cut your teeth on non-league, because it's exactly the same. And you know, it was really hard to sell a perimeter advertising board for £20 to a small business in Cologne, and the next minute I'm selling naming rights to a stadium for 30-40 million, and it's just, you know, it's just numbers. You still have to do the deal. So that's where I started in non-league football. And an old mate of mine called Steve Kindon was at Huddersfield, and he left the job, and he as he left it vacant, he had told the board that I would make a good somebody to follow him. So that's how I started at Huddersfield, at the old Leeds Road Stadium. There used to be 66,000 crammed in the old Leeds Road, and when I got there, it had a ground safety certificate for about 8,200. So something had to change, and we were lucky enough that we had a big empty 50-acre site just next to the stadium. So that's the good fortune there at Huddersfield.
And is that how you got into stadiums? Because Huddersfield was the first major one you developed, wasn't it? Is that right?
It was, yeah, it is. In fact, I was enjoying my commercial manager job so much, I didn't want the stadium job. And when the chairman approached me, he said, we want to build a stadium. And I said, well, don't involve me, because I'm loving the job. I'm putting on sportsmen's dinners, I'm organising weddings and conferences and banqueting, and I'm selling programme advertising. I absolutely love the job. But he said, no, he said, I'll turn you from commercial manager to chief executive if you'll take on this job. So there'd only been one new stadium at Walsall built in the UK at the time, so it was pretty new, with no where to turn for help and advice. And I complained about the FA. There is still nowhere to turn for help and advice. The FA or football or you know, the institution, you'd think there would be a go-to place if you wanted to build a new stadium, but there isn't. So every club builds their own, and the knowledge that they spend in designing and building this new stadium is all lost, because it stays there. So yeah, that's how I started at Huddersfield, and it was a good start. I enjoyed it.
And is that how you got involved in the Wembley? Because you had that experience. Is that how they called you into Wembley?
No, well, yeah, yes and no. It's funny. The other thing, I've always been one in life. Sorry for taking on challenges, and I was challenged once. Whenever I was a player, people used to ask me to speak at dinners at golf clubs and whatever, and I would always shy away from it. And I went on a Dale Carnegie course to try and find out about what life was like outside football. And the golden words that this guy used as he was doing the course, he said, where do opportunities lie? Inside your comfort zone or outside your comfort zone? And I realised I'd been living in my little comfort zone, saying I don't want to do this dinner because I'm too scared to stand up in front of people. So I made my mind up. I said to myself as I drove home that night, if anybody ever asks me to speak at a dinner, I will never say no again. So I got into after dinner speaking. You know, I was terrible my first 4, 5, 6, but I started to learn, and I've made my mistakes. And then I was speaking on cruises. I was speaking abroad. I was speaking all over the show. So that's how I slowly got it, and that's how I got into. Strangely enough, when you talk about Wembley, I used to do a lot of sportsmen's dinners at Sheffield Wednesday, and I used to sit next to the chairman, Dave Richards, who became Sir Dave Richards.
Of course, yes.
And 10 years later, he's in charge of Wembley. And 10 years later, he picks the phone up to me, who was his friend by then. And at that time, I was at Bolton Wanderers, just finished the Reebok. And he said, Paul, how do you fancy coming down and helping us build a new Wembley Stadium? So that's, you know, it's funny, life's a strange thing, but the people you meet and opportunities. And if I hadn't have taken on those after dinner speaking events, I wouldn't have bumped into Dave Richards, and I wouldn't have met him that way, and I wouldn't have ended up at Wembley. So that was my sort of career path. It wasn't planned, it was all accidental.
And that job there must have been highly political, wasn't it?
Yes. I must admit I was too soft for it. It was very tough. The chairman was tough. Ken Bates, who was the chairman of Chelsea. There was only six people on the board. I was one of those 6. And I always remember he always used to start off the board meeting by saying, "Who have we sacked since last board meeting?" So that was always a good start to put you on your toes. But he did some good deals. In fact, even though a lot of people didn't like Ken, and he was tough, and he did say, "I'm going to build the best football stadium in the world, and it doesn't have an athletics track around it." He said, "So I'm going to get in enormous trouble with the government, with UK athletics, with everybody, but I want you all to stick with me. We are not putting a running track around the National Stadium." And he was right to do that, because now spectators, you know, I know spectators at West Ham, and they have to sit 30, 40, 50 metres away from the action, and it's not quite the same. So we owe Ken Bates a big thanks for that. So yeah, it was a tough time. I lasted 2.5 years as commercial director, got a bit homesick after that and wanted to come home. But it's always nice to have Wembley Stadium on your CV.
Absolutely. But you've done some big jobs in football. I mean, and football is renowned for being quite fickle. Is that fair? At times?
Yeah.
It does take a lot of character to do the jobs you've done.
Yeah. Well, the reason that it's strange is that the people who run it, I say this tongue in cheek, don't know what they're doing. Because they buy into it. Yeah. Just imagine you have a football club, it's a Premiership club or a Championship club. Most of the board of directors are not on that board because they understand how the business works. They buy the way in. So you'll get a director who's been a fan of the club for many, many years, becomes a multimillionaire, wants to go on the board. The next minute he's on the board because he's put 5, 10, 15 million in, and he's bought himself a seat on the board. No experience of how to run the football business. So it's a very strange, and often we've seen these football clubs that are tried to run by the fans, and often the fans don't know how to run them as well. So, you know, it's a strange business, because in other business that I've been in, the people who are sat on the board have spent 20 years in that industry, and they've made their way up, and slowly they've got onto the board because of the knowledge of the industry. In football, you just buy your way in. I mean, it's strange.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about, I love the vision you're saying about how a stadium should be a centre of a community, but it's always getting that balance right, isn't it, between the community and the fan. Is that fair?
Yeah, it is really. It's you see, all the fans want really is a team that wins every week. They're not much bothered about anything else. And what you try to do when you run the stadium, you've only got the 30 games every year, so the stadium almost sits idle, and you try to utilize it for lots of other different types of events. But it is isolated. Because we wrap car parks generally around football stadiums, they become isolated. So that is why the new concept of putting one in the centre of a town is a good idea, and they become a focal point. Now, Wembley, I don't know if you've been to Wembley the last few years, excuse me.
Yeah.
Wembley, without any planning, is now wrapped around high-rise blocks of student accommodation, residential, office space, and that wasn't planned. It's just evolved around it. And now Wembley is busy 7 days a week. It's not just busy on match days, because what follows when you put people in and you put the community there, you have shops and you've got bars and you've got restaurants and all food options and theatres, which are all sprung up around this very busy place. And that's the model that MasterCard has used, and they're trying to position some stadiums like this all around the world and saying, you know, don't just build a football stadium just for football, build it for the centre of the community. And if you put the right facilities in there, you know, it needs a police station in this facility, it needs a town hall in there, it needs a university in there. And then you've got a churn of young people every year filling the university who will spend their money in the Starbucks. On match days, they'll get a job working in the ticket office. And then suddenly, 3 years later, once they've done the degree, another churn of thousands of students come along. You know, so you've got a building that really does become a community building. And it brings young people through to go on to hopefully better things in this football business, not in this country, but all around the world.
Oh, I get that. It's come a long way in 20 years, hasn't it?
It has.
I mean, we really have developed our thinking over that period of time. What has been the catalyst?
Well, there's no doubt what the catalyst is: television. When I was a player, I do remember on one occasion, he was called Freddie Hill. I was only 17 and he came in. I'd played about 5 games for Bolton, and he said, "You'll never guess what." He said, "On Sunday," because they used to record it on Saturday and play it on Sunday, we're on television. Yeah. And every one of us gets an extra £10 in our wage. Now that's at a time when a £60 a week wage was a big. I remember Francis Lee was called, went from Bolton from 60 to £85 a week. So it was a lot of money. And it was a time when the players got paid if it was a televised game. Now, the reason it is so massive now is that because we have this cool climate over here, and we have these soft pitches, and we have these big crowds and big stadiums, we sell this game all around the world. 290 countries, I think it gets sold to. So this is where all the multi-millions of pounds have started to come from, and obviously paying big wages to the players. So it's not to do with a normal evolution of a football business evolving around the town. It's about, in fact, as I say, the fans there are just there to create an atmosphere. This is a business that's beamed around the world.
No, I understand that. So look, I'm a fan of the 1970s. That's what I grew up with.
Excuse me.
So it is such a different game today, isn't it?
It is different in many ways. The players are a lot fitter. The players are a lot more skillful. I've only been talking this morning to the son of Nobby Stiles, who sadly died, who everybody hated Nobby Stiles. And I told his son that. I said, "We absolutely hated your father, but we'd have loved to have had him in our team because he was so physical." And that used to bring an extra element to the game. The physicality, and every player had a hitman. You know, you went to Leeds and it was Johnny Giles and Billy Bremner, and you went to Manchester United, it was Nobby Stiles, and wherever you went there was a hitman. Football has been sanitised. It's turned into a skillful game that's almost played by ballerinas rather than being played by the hard men as it was. So it's changed. Whether it's changed for the better for a spectator, I don't think so. I don't like VAR. By standing a referee in the middle of the pitch, it worked for, I think, about 150 years. And now we don't get any better decisions than we seem to get when we had the single referee. So football has changed, and the stadiums that support these stadiums are starting to change.
But in some ways, if it does become the vision you're painting, that centre of the community, that should be a really exciting development, won't it?
Well, yes, because if you design all the obvious things in, like the obvious things in our designing another sport like rugby, which is quite easy, rock concerts, put a covered roof on one end and a closing door where you can have an arena. I have this concept called Stadia Arena, where if you can put a Stadia Arena in, then you have esports that can be in there, and then suddenly it starts to be something that's working every way. And around the stadium, rather than a car park wrapping around the stadium, we need a piazza, maybe a 70-metre space that wraps all around the stadium. And on the outskirts of the piazza are shops and offices and hotels and restaurants and bars. And then when you go to, after the game, when you park your car 200 metres away from the stadium, you walk through these bars and shops and obviously have a drink on your way back, and you get used to maybe having a meal on your way. So that's how it becomes part of the community. And I still think the massive mistake is still these new stadiums wrapping a car park around the stadium. It just doesn't work.
No, I understand that. You obviously have a great desire to learn. You have a thirst for knowledge, and there's obviously one of the things about you.
But I find that somebody like myself who always wants to, I make so many mistakes, and I encourage people. I encourage my kids and my grandchildren. Don't be scared of making mistakes. You never ever get it right all the time. And sometimes people have said to me, that was a great idea of you as doing it. And I always think, yeah, but they don't know about the 10 other ideas that have all gone, So there's an old saying I picked up in America, and it's never accept the first no. When somebody says to you, how do you find it? No. Don't accept it. Go back at them and say, well, how about if I reposition this and do it differently? So not accepting the first no. And having I've had some absolutely awful ideas, but every now and then I have a good one that comes through.
Oh, look, Paul, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. It really has.
Okay. Thank you. It's always nice to reminisce, Chris, and thanks for reminding me of that goal at Ellen Road.
Well, I have to ask, before we go, I have to ask, that Leeds team, how good was it?
Well, they won the league that year.
But it dominated for about 5 years, didn't it? But didn't win as much.
Yeah, well, for your football fans who are listening to this, football was a little bit different in those days because you had, normally you had 5 players in your team who were cloggers, hitmen, physical, and you had 5 players, obviously the goalkeeper at the back, you had 5 players who were skillful, and that was the mix. Don Revie decided he would have 11 players, including the goalkeeper, who would be hitmen. Every single one of them were physical, dirty, they'd punch you, they'd spit at you, but they were all good players. So he selected great players who had a lot of physicality to them. And it was really hard to play at places like Ellen Road. It was, and that year that we beat them, as I said, they won the championship. So
it was a phenomenal day.
And they were happy times.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Chris. Thank you.